定刻になりましたので、開始させていただきます。ジェトロサンフランシスコ主催のオンラインセミナーにご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございます。本日は前回に続きまして、日本企業に接しているエコシステムの指揮者を招きまして、外から見たアドバイスをいただきます。議論は英語で行いますが、日本語への同時通訳があります。画面の右下に地球のマークのインタープリテーションと書かれたアイコンがございます。それをクリックして日本語を選択してください。英語で聞かれたい方はオフを選択してください。ご参加の皆様は随時 Q&A 機能を使いまして講師に質問を送ることができます。質問は日本語でも結構です。こちらで英語にして講師にお見せします。また、すでに類似の質問が寄せられていましたらば、いいねボタンを押してください。Today, we have invited three distinguished guests. Klaus Vihaig, founder and CEO at 10X Innovation Lab, Abe Smith, head of international Zoom video communications, and Gideon Marks, anchor mentor, Google for startups. The three speakers play different roles in the Silicon Valley ecosystem with different careers and backgrounds, but they all have one thing in common. They have lots of experience working with companies outside the US, including Japanese companies. So without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Klaus, who moderates today's session. Klaus, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yamashita-san, and thanks to everyone for joining today's call. We understand there is some simultaneous translation going on, so we will try to speak, in a relatively slow manner, so the translators can catch up on what we're saying on this call. But first and foremost, I just want to say thanks to Yamashita-san for inviting us to this webinar. I understand this is the last one of approximately 5. So maybe we'll cover some topics that's already been covered, but at the very least, it comes from maybe a different angle. We obviously have Abe Smith from Zoom on this call, and Gideon Marks. He's from Israel, Abe is from the US, and I'm from Denmark. So it's a quite diverse group of people. So on today's call, we're hoping to share some unique insights in terms of how to be successful in international business and in Silicon Valley specifically. And so we really want to help you give some tools and give you some tools and insights to be able to be successful in this ecosystem. And so just to give you a bit of background on just me quickly is I am the CEO and founder of 10X Innovation Lab, which is a local consultancy in Silicon Valley. And one of the reasons why Yamashita-san invited me to lead the session is partly because we're running a couple of projects with Jetro. We recently just ended a program that supported local entrepreneurs from Japan in helping them connect to Silicon Valley. So an accelerator program, if you will, where we work with approximately 8 companies. And so I know intimately in terms of the challenges that Japanese companies are facing as they come and want to do business in Silicon Valley. We also work with big corporations that want to tap into the ecosystem and partner with startups and venture capital, etc. And so we sort of get a bit of the understanding of the cultural differences that exist between Silicon Valley and Japan. And Abe here on the call, he's going to tell that himself. He also have a lot of experience with Japan, as well as also Gideon Marks has a breadth of depth of experience within this area as well, having worked with us as an organization. So just to give you a bit of background, right? So Gideon Marks is a very close friend of mine. I have had the pleasure of traveling the world with him on multiple occasions to Japan, and he's also been to Taiwan with me, etc. And most of that work has been in relation to these startup programs. So I know him very intimately. So if there's some like insider jokes here happening on this call, that's probably the reason why, because we've had the experience of sharing meals together and everything on multiple occasions. And so Gideon, as mentioned before, he brings the experience coming from Israel into Silicon Valley. So he can share some of his insights coming as a foreigner into this market. And on the side of Abe, I only recently gotten to know him through multiple conversations that we've had in relation to a new book that we're writing on the topic of international expansion. And so Abe was one of the first people who said, yes, Klaus, I'm happy to have a conversation. Let's set up a call. And, the relationship started from there. Abe has been really, really gracious with this time, and really helped us being able to develop what we really feel is a very, very good book that, really gives unique insights on how to take a business from a local market to an international market. So just want to call out Abe and say thank you for spending all that time with Aaron McDaniel, who's my co-author, and me on multiple occasions, and really just spilling your heart out around this topic, because I know you are truly, truly passionate about this. And also, I'll show you a bit later, there's a concept that we recently developed called an entrepreneur. And he just embodies this concept. And we're very, very excited to have him present on today's call as well. So the format today is fairly simple. First, I'm going to allow everyone to do some personal introductions. About 3 to 5 minutes. I'll let Gidon do it and Abe do it, and then I'll show you 2 concepts from the book. Afterwards, we'll delve into a 30-minute panel discussion. I have a set of questions that I've already developed. Hopefully, it'll turn into a dialogue, and maybe we'll spin off a bit. When Abe says something, and it becomes an aha moment for me, and I want to dive deeper. So hopefully, this is going to be a really useful conversation for you all as you want to do business with Silicon Valley and also understand the journey of actually going into new markets. Afterwards, we're going to be allowing everyone to ask questions. And it's to my understanding, you can use the text box in writing that in here on today's call. And that's going to be migrated over in a Google Doc. I'll then take that question and then ask Gidon and Abe on this call, and then we'll have a dialogue around those things. So we want to make sure that you guys understand that you can be involved in the conversation by asking the questions through that text box. Finally, at the end, we'll do a quick closing remarks. Yamashita-san will come in again and ask and just close down the conversation. And obviously, we send everyone good luck on your journeys, and hopefully you can apply some of these concepts and learnings from today's call. Sound good? Beautiful. So I want to start off maybe calling on one of you guys, Abe and Gidon. Maybe Gidon, you can start with doing your introduction, and then afterwards Abe, and then I'll do a quick introduction of some of the concepts that we've developed for the book Expand. Gidon?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Klaus and Tan, for the kind words. A pleasure meeting you all. I wish we were in a different time that we could see each other, but with Zoom, at least we can communicate in the most effective way. So a quick introduction about myself. As Klaus said, I'm originally from Israel, which is considered to be, just like Silicon Valley, the other tech hub of the world. I found myself moving to Silicon Valley 20 years ago. So I spent about half of my career in the Israeli high-tech arena, and half of it in Silicon Valley. Until 5 years ago, I was a real operational guy. I was chief financial officer, business development executive. I took 3 companies public on NASDAQ. I've done 4 M&A transactions. And since then, after the last company I worked for, I found myself more mentoring, sharing my experience, usually with a younger generation. One more thing, I was a captain in the Israeli Air Force, and I will mention this just because some of the things you learn while service, I think are very good for later types of leadership. So I will try to share with you something that I prepared specifically for our talk today. So the topic, as I was told, is talk about innovation activities by Japanese companies towards behavioral changes in Silicon Valley. And I will be more than happy to share this presentation with you if anyone is interested. So when we talk about Silicon Valley, this is the famous Apple campus, which is about 2 kilometers from here. It's not just a location, geography, it's a mindset. And in the next slide, I'll try to share with you some of the things that I experience, whether in Israel or in Silicon Valley, that I think can be very helpful to Japanese executives, whether senior, whether young, etc. So I tried to summarize in a 10 bullet the observation I've seen in my close to 40 years of high-tech experience. So having visited Japan just before COVID 3 times within 12 months, these are the things that I've noticed. These are the things that I've always felt sharing with my Japanese friends. What makes Silicon Valley and to some extent Israel so unique is the diversity. And here we've got so many people from so many backgrounds, so many religions, so many languages, and each one of these diverse people brings his or her culture, background, gender, etc. So I urge each one of any Japanese executives to always look for diversity within their companies. Have more women in your management team. Try to bring non-Japanese into your teams. The next thing that I've seen, which we talk a lot here in Silicon Valley, is the type of culture you're seeing here. In Japan, I believe that usually you'll see the top down. So the top person makes the decision. He usually tells all his subordinates, this is what we need to do. While if you combine also the bottom up, then you get a lot of additional people and there's a joint involvement. And this makes the team feel more comfortable with their contribution. Another aspect that I always tell Japanese people is try to encourage your employees to become team players. I think that what we are seeing here in Silicon Valley is that you trust your employees. You want your employees to feel part of the big task. So don't just give instructions. Let them speak up, share their opinion. Management should always be open to new ideas. You've got to encourage your team members to challenge what you do, what you decide, and always tell them, look for what things we're not doing efficiently. The more you ask your team members to be involved, the more contribution you will get from them. To some extent, number 5 is, how about we turn the pyramid upside down? Let's empower our managers to as much as possible. Let them be more independent. Let them take risks. Let them take decisions. You as an executive embrace initiative and those who challenge the existing paradigms. Very important. Employees who are getting empowerment better contribute to achieving the goals of the company. One of the things that I did notice with Japanese companies is, how do you deal with satellite offices that you open outside of the headquarters in Japan? So I believe that once you decide to have a branch office outside of the headquarters, please listen to them. Let them speak. Let them bring new ideas to the headquarters, and hopefully this will change to the better the organization. Military experience. I told you I was an officer. I served 4.5 years. At a very young age, we're exposed back in Israel to being accountable, what is teamwork, being responsible, and the debriefing option, which is let's talk openly. How did we do? Did we do well or did we not do well? Can we do better? This is something I encourage every company I'm involved in to set, and we can discuss this later. The two last items are very important. Disruption, I think this is Silicon Valley. Even when we look at Zoom, Zoom disrupted the way people communicate. And the last point, I think, is the biggest thing. We in Silicon Valley, when we fail, we don't look at this as the end of the world. So please, if someone does a mistake in your companies, hopefully you realize that this person learned from his or her mistakes. Give them the ability to try again. This is kind of a fun slide. I always tell people, what do you see? And they see an elephant and a hippo. The notion of this picture is elephants have big ears, small mouth, hippos have huge mouth, tiny ears. So I'm always asking us as executives, you gain knowledge by listening to your employees, your customers, your vendors, anyone. And if you as a leader talk too much, you put your employees in the shadow, the organization is not moving fast. And thank you. This was kind of my starting point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gideon. You mentioned very, very important topics like diversity, how that is important in terms of innovation. You talked about autonomy, which is critical for being successful when going global. You touched on a lot of different themes here that certainly will be relevant to this discussion we're going to be having on today's call. Abe, do you want to do your introduction here?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Klaus. I'm sorry I don't have a PowerPoint to share.
All good.
But I'll provide a few comments and very, very insightful points from Gideon. Now, first of all, thank you for including me in the conversation. It's a pleasure to be with this group, particularly with a sponsorship from Yamashita-san and Jetro. I've known Jetro for more than 30 years, and my history in Japan goes back to a young student who traveled to Nagasaki-ken in Kyushu about 30 years ago to get to know your country and to get to know your people. And I think, as Gideon said, it's important to learn and listen, and that's a very important theme in general. I think we can appreciate one another by getting to know the wonderful qualities that the leadership in Japan brings to the world, and then also share some thoughts on creativity that comes from places like Silicon Valley. My experience has gone through companies like WebEx, where I started more than 20 years ago, and I met a young engineer by the name of Eric Yuan, who is now our CEO of Zoom. So relationships and trust is a very important theme in Silicon Valley or anywhere. And I've been fortunate to have the chance to work at wonderful companies like Cisco after we were acquired and develop unified communications around the world, and then other great companies like Oracle. But I think one thing that's fantastic is whether you're in a big company or a small company is a chance to innovate and to disrupt and to develop and grow. And that's the key to life, is happiness and finding things that make you, bring you enjoyment. And that's a very important theme. So I'm very honored to be a part of the conversation today, and I hope to learn from you and share some ideas with you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abe. Definitely a story about Japan was some of the things that I took notice of not when we interviewed you, but when I was screening your profile. That was sort of an interesting thing that popped out, right? Because as I'm going to be telling you guys in the next couple of minutes is that, people that has this entrepreneurial mindset often have a very formative experience. And we noticed that with you, with a lot of other interviewees that we have interviewed over the past couple of months, is that there's a unique moment in a person's life that just really impacts you for the rest of your life in terms of how you view the world and view business, right? So yeah. But let me kind of go into presenting some, really basic concepts that's included in our upcoming book called Expand. And just to give you a bit of background, Aaron McDaniel, my co-author, and I, we had this crazy idea of writing a book on international expansion. We have done a ton of research over, a couple of months to kind of figure out what has not been covered in terms of global business. And we've seen a lot of 0 to 1s and those type of books in terms of teaching entrepreneurship and how to build a company at scale. But there was not really anything that covered the topic in terms of taking one company from a unique market to another. And so we felt that there was an area we could really contribute, both from our own learnings, having worked with a lot of companies that want to tap into the Silicon Valley market, but also coupling that with experts like Abe and others. And so fast forward now, having set a goal early on in October, interviewing 30 people, we've now interviewed 75 people. And today we just got off a call with one of the leading CEOs in Denmark, as well as the founder of Unity, David Helgeson, really talking about all the concepts that we've developed for the book. And honestly, very proud to say that we're getting a lot of, people are nodding a lot when we talk to them and say, you're onto something, and really just in general, challenge the frameworks just a bit, but overall agree in terms of the content that we've developed for the book. So we feel very, very blessed to hopefully be a part of future companies' journey as they go global. And so one of the concept that we have developed is this whole entrepreneur concept, right? International, as in international, right? And again, Abe is someone that truly embodies this. Really what that is someone that has that entrepreneurial mindset, as well as also the entrepreneurial mindset in terms of being able to operate within corporate structures and build coalition and buy-in, as well as also really having that, what we call the X factor, if you will, culture, curiosity, global mindedness that allows them to operate in international markets, right? And as I mentioned before, usually and most often, the people that we interviewed that embodies this is people that really have had these formative experiences. Everything from the GM of International from Evernote, who was on a missionary in Korea, to the SVP of adoption for Salesforce, who got lost in a Japanese market in a rural area. Most of these people have this very, very unique story to share, and that just really impacted them, even today, right? So really having that global mindset. And that's often what we see in many more traditional economies, is that there are not a lot of these people actually. And I'm a true believer that needs to be nurtured in order to make their companies more successful globally. And so we got off a call with a company called Born to Global just a couple of days ago, who is very influential and under the Ministry of Science and Technology. And he said, this is, even though it's a simple concept, this is a very important concept. So as they change government next year, he actually wants to create a policy around entrepreneurship. So we're getting all this interesting feedback basically from the book. And so another thing, one of the key themes that we actually got from Abe and other leaders is the whole, hiring is one of the key challenges as you go global, right? And so if you see on this framework here, we obviously have the entrepreneurial mindset, which is very, very important, but oftentimes where we see the biggest challenge for many companies is the intersection of company knowledge and local knowledge, right? And that's also an area where we see, at the very least, Japanese organizations are struggling a lot with, because typically the decision that I made is taking someone from the headquarters, bringing them over, taking a deep dive and do business in Silicon Valley. But they don't really have a peer here in Silicon Valley to partner with, so they can truly sort of engage and understand the local business culture here in Silicon Valley. Then obviously the leadership skills is important as you are driving a business in a new market, but just want to kind of show you that these are just some simple concepts that are in the book. We have much more advanced frameworks, but at least people and hiring is absolutely key to be successful internationally. And I'm sure Abe and Gidon also can agree on this topic. So that was just a short introduction of this in terms of what we developed around the area of people. But I want to use this as a segue into our discussion, right? And to get on and Abe, maybe Abe first here, what are some of the qualifications you think someone would need to have to be successful in Silicon Valley?
You know, Silicon Valley is an interesting place, as Gideon said. And I do think that there's a very creative spirit, an open spirit, a collaborative place, an ethos around failing fast and trying new things. We also believe that collaboration and, transparency is really important, and that fundamentally, a culture that cares is highly relevant. So, succeeding in Silicon Valley, I think, is around being open to experimenting, a little bit of flexibility to network and learn. As Gideon said, the talent around the combination of academics, venture capitalists, technologists, theorists, pundits, etc., is quite intriguing in a very, very small area. So, like any place, there is a bit of a networking element that's important, because you'll find that people tend to help one another. I think it's a very cohesive place where it's not around hurting people, it's around encouraging one another to change the world. So I think that kind of spirit allows for people to succeed and work well in Silicon Valley, I think.
Totally. Get on, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Abe covered the whole basis. I think that the biggest thing here is how, when I came here 20 years ago, I didn't feel a stranger, because when you look around yourself, I mean, all my neighbors, I would say, are Chinese, Indians, Europeans. There are some real Americans, as I like to say, and Israelis are here. I think that this is the beautiful thing about Silicon Valley. It's this acceptance of everybody. You can talk with a funny accent. You can look different. No one really cares. And I think that once you move into such an accommodating place, it makes your life relatively easy. So I think this is one of the biggest contributors that I've seen in this piece of geography, which is very small, actually.
I agree. I mean, I've lived in both Vietnam and in Chile, and now Silicon Valley, and by far I was much faster in terms of being able to connect with the community, right? And really a lot of the challenges that I see from maybe companies coming from other cultures that are a bit more traditionally in terms of doing business is kind of being that, open from the very get-go, right? And kind of telling who you are. And so kind of leaning into conversations in Silicon Valley are super, super important, right? And finding a way to contribute as well, I find, at the very least. I mean, personally myself, I was very intentional. I didn't go in and tap into the Danish community. I very consciously chose let me dive in to Silicon Valley in the pockets, and me joining an organization called Silicon Valley Forum, which obviously was a very known nonprofit, allows me to better connect to that market as well. So finding those unique communities that you can truly engage with and learn from is super, super important. And so kind of maybe taking a bit from like the perspective from Japanese business culture, right? What are some of the unique challenges that you guys are seeing, and how can they tactically sort of dive into the community and truly engage with this market here in Silicon Valley? Yeah, get on. Sure.
Yeah, so if I understood the question correctly, is what are the kind of challenges some Japanese companies will see here? So, until you meet real Japanese back in Japan, it's difficult for you to understand the background of the people trying to immerse and do well here. So while I was with Klaus before COVID in Japan, I noticed a few things that are very characteristics to Japanese. So for instance, most Japanese are extremely, very, very humble, playing low key. They won't talk too badly about competition. They won't praise themselves too much. When they introduce themselves, a lot of times they'll call themselves, I'm a sales manager, I'm a manager. Fast forward, you move to Silicon Valley, here is what happens. Here in the US, a manager, for instance, is a very low kind of class, because the person you're talking in America wants to know that you, the Japanese person, you're representing your company and you're a decision maker. So if you introduce yourself as a manager, to most American, it means that you're not a real decision maker. They don't want to waste their time on you. When you talk about your company and you compare yourselves to competition, a lot of times I noticed that some of the Japanese were not kind of, bursting into a lot of energy describing their companies. When you talk, you try to pitch your story to a potential customer. If you will try to recruit some executive here in the US, talk with confidence, with passion about what your company is doing, and don't just downplay it, because this shows the audience here in the US as if you're not comfortable, you're not sure about your company. So I do urge a lot of the Japanese guys, when you come to the US, change or work a little bit on your body language. Have the eye contact that Americans are so used to. Upgrade yourself in a title to, vice president, director. Talk with confidence about the value proposition your company solution can provide American customers. These are the things that culturally are so different. I come from another country, Israel. Israelis are known for having chutzpah, which is outgoing. They're not shy. Chutzpah can also be negative connotation, meaning you don't have good manners. But usually, the word chutzpah means that you outgo. You really represent your company with confidence. You understand your audience needs, etc. So this is kind of my opening comments.
Dave, any thoughts?
Look, first, I'm amazed to see if chutzpah can be translated perfectly in this context. But you're right. Look, I think there are some challenges that you've got to think about. First of all, language is difficult. Let's be clear. Americans speak very quickly. Their concepts are very fast. And I do find that sometimes it is a bit of a struggle with the pace and speed of the language. That's challenging for anybody. So I think, getting yourself acclimated on a tonality perspective to be able to hear and understand around you is important. What I think is amazing, though, I think, Japanese companies do some amazing things that we can learn from that I think applied very well to Silicon Valley. The sensitivity to caring and appreciating the customer, that is the best Silicon Valley companies like Apple, for example, or like Zoom or others. They are intimate with their customer. They care about service and they care about what the client is saying. And the most important thing is to take care of the client and the community. So I think that philosophy lends very well to Silicon Valley, and appreciation for that is really important. At the same time, there is an openness to appreciate that Silicon Valley does move very quickly. As you look at high growth companies or startups, the motion is around speed. There is a incentive around speed. The good news is, I think, again, with Japanese companies, like some very innovative ones, like SoftBank has done a fantastic job. If you look at Sansan and what he's done globally, it's amazing. Or certainly Rakuten with Mikitani-san, that cultural sensitivity of working together with no fear and speed is very important. So I think those things tend to help when you tackle Silicon Valley, but then also be true to yourself. there's a real interest from most people about learning more about Japan, and there is a beauty about the country and the philosophies that people really appreciate as well. So don't divorce yourself around what makes you special and who you are, because that is accepted in Silicon Valley.
You bring up get on.
I want to add something personal. So I think that when you share personal stories, you get the highest impact. So I'll share with you a personal story back from 91. Klaus, I think, knows the story. I was doing my first IPO on NASDAQ. And at that time, I would say my English was not as nice as my English now. And I was young and I hardly knew how to wear even a suit. So Lehman Brothers and Oppenheimer were our underwriters, and the CEO and myself have to talk and present the company we're taking public to Lehman Brothers sales force. Guys, this is scary. I'm 30 years younger and my English is so-and-so. And we're just number 2 in the presenting companies. The first company that presents, the CEO and the CFO are both Americans, just like Abe. They talk, and I look at them, and I remember I did this, and I said, oh my God, I have to talk after these 2 Americans with my broken English. I was very lucky, and I'm giving you this tip. The analyst working at the investment bank saw that I was very nervous. She came to me, gave me a big hug, and said to me words that I still remember. She said, Gideon, you're here not for an English test. You're here to prove to these potential investors in the company you're taking public that you are the best chief financial officer for this specific company. This is your job. And I remember I looked at her and I said, you're so right. And I just went up and provided a great talk, because suddenly I realized English is not my first language, but I'm not tested because the Americans are accommodating. They're open to funny, different ways of expressing yourself. So don't worry too much about your accent. English, show that you are the best executives for your companies. Personal story.
Awesome to get on. I realize we have 2 people that are very good at sharing stories and talking, so we're already like, don't have a lot of time. But so I want to jump a couple of questions here. This is good, so I'm not saying it as a negative, of course. But Abe, you're a rare breed of what I would define as a true entrepreneur, right? So you've been extremely intentional about building a global career. So what are some of the hurdles that you've come across in international business broadly?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is, Klaus, I'm not sure they're hurdles, but I think you have to create a fidelity of understanding the tolerance inside the company. Every company wants to be global and international. The truth is not every company is ready to be global or international, or they're not ready to be global and international in every country. So you really have to think about where the company prioritizes what's important, what's the right order, and guide that. And part of it is arbitrating between the chutzpah or the excitement of the company and the reality of the state of progression. I'd say, like, we were very fortunate at Zoom. We knew our product lent itself internationally. We also had a CEO that was very internationally minded. He lived in Yokohama, for example. I lived in Japan. So we knew that Japan was a market we could serve, but we were also committed and we understood the reality. Sometimes not everybody understands exactly what it takes. So part of the hurdles is to be mentally prepared for pace and timing, and then also setting expectations with your company. You cannot address everything at once. It's quite difficult. So you have to set vital few priorities, I think.
Totally. It's a nice segue to my follow-up question, actually. So what are some of the adjustments that you have to make in terms of strategy, mindset, and product when expanding to Japan, for example?
Yeah, we were lucky. I mean, I think in general, the product with Zoom lends itself to a global audience. However, for it to operate and for us to serve the requirements of a Japanese customer, we had to look at, and we continue to look at the entire end-to-end process. What's the customer and employee experience like? Are the translations correct? Is the localization right? So beyond just the actual translation, are there elements in the product that speak to how people want to use it that might be nuanced or unique to Japan? How do we address that? Can we build it, or can we partner with others that have more expertise? And we've been lucky to have some fantastic partners in NEC and NESIC, and as I mentioned, SoftBank and Rakuten and others. So that helps us because it allows us to design with more sensitivity. And also, as we think about our partner strategy, I think there's a lot of local partners that integrate and can provide the right kind of answer for the market too.
Okay. What these were a lot of positives, right? What were some of the main challenges then?
On a challenges level, it really comes down to speed. Particularly in entering a market during a time when there was a need for the product, we had to be able to move fast enough to support the opportunity. To be very honest with you, in the case of Zoom, and in some cases, it was very difficult to do it in a way that we felt provided the level that customers expected, what they needed in a timely fashion, and the responsiveness. We did it. We had to work very, very hard to do it, but it was a challenge. It was a challenge to do it with speed, and that's a bit of a converse for Japan. Typically, it's a lot slower in a place like Japan, but for us, we had the same requirements around the world with the demand that was happening simultaneously. So for us, the challenge was to provide the right kind of service, the right kind of product at the right kind of time with speed.
I want to move over to focus a bit on Get On here and now again. So you talked a bit about the cultural differences, right? Get On. What were some of your personal main challenges in terms of truly connecting to Silicon Valley?
Most of the challenges had to do, I would say, with communication. Each one of us brings his or her way of behavior that are embedded and engraved in our DNA, the way we act in our old countries. And some things that are so natural, let's say in our old country, here may look sometimes aggressive, or they will be completely misunderstood. For those of you who are not familiar, Israel is on the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean is we're very warm people. We like to touch, and we use our hands, we speak freely. And for instance, I remember 2 months after I moved here, I called one of my American colleagues and I said, "Klaus, come." And I did this gesture with my hand, which is very common, let's say, in Israel. And a day later, I'll never forget, the CEO's assistant came to my office and said, "That's not the right way to talk to people." And she explained to me different. This was a big shock for me. Another example is the system here doesn't like challenges. A lot of times people tend to accept, let's do a kumbaya decision. And if I don't mind challenging someone, if I think this person is wrong, what's the perfect way to say, let's say if I want to say to Klaus, "You're wrong," Klaus and I can say to each other, "You're wrong," we won't be offended because we know each other. But in the US, for instance, in some cases, if you say, "Abe, you're wrong," it won't lead to anything. This will be accepted as an aggressive gesture by me. So I think that one of the things that I've seen in companies like Intel and other companies, when you send employees or executives to a new geography, perhaps consider giving them some kind of preparation lessons to the culture, to the way people get dressed, to the way people talk between each other. I remember a good friend of mine working for Intel said that Intel, because they're such a diverse international company, they spend tons of time on these preparation courses that will eliminate friction, which should not prevent companies reaching their goals. So another thing you should consider, which we in Israel always had a big challenge, when you open a branch in the US, who do you put at the very top? Do you put a Japanese executive or do you put someone who is local? There's no right versus wrong. I've seen a lot of foreigners who led their offices, nothing accomplished. And I've seen lots of cases where Americans were recruited to run the US branch, complete disaster. So there isn't right versus wrong here, but I think that you do have, as I mentioned, to have a diverse office, which is a combination of, in your case, Japanese people, but also locals, that the dialogue between them will help to make this group, I would say, efficient in the decision-making, reaction to customers, taking ideas from here and pouring it back towards headquarters in Japan. So these are just a few examples.
Do you have any specific company examples where you're seeing Japanese organization being successful in Silicon Valley?
I would say that I know NEC here, and I had the pleasure of working with NEC in my previous company, the one that was acquired a few years ago. And I could see how they were trying to build a relatively strong team here. However, when you begin to chat, I think that one of the biggest, and I think it's got to do culturally, is can the NEC or the Japanese company here, management here, can they send information to Tokyo in a way that the Tokyo office will look at this very seriously? Will someone at headquarters be the champion for the ideas coming from the branch? And I think that most of the branches, the Japanese ones here, know to take ideas from headquarters in Japan and bring it to here. But I think that you need a symmetric approach. But NEC, I can say I was impressed with their way of trying to overcome some of these challenges that I just described to you.
That's a good comment.
Klaus, I've seen some as well. Like, years ago, there was a small startup called Treasure Data, and a young Japanese Silicon Valley-like CEO came over to the United States. And so part of it was he took the risk. He came over and said, I'm going to build my team here. His developers were all in Tokyo. And the result was hard. I mean, it was a lot of hard work. When I met him, we went out to lunch at a soba shop, and he only spoke English. Even though I understand Japanese, and we were eating lunch at a soba shop, he was very determined to stay persistent in his approach. The end result was the company got bought by ARM Technologies, which is part of SoftBank, right? So it's a good outcome. And I look at something like that every day. I drive by Rakuten, and Rakuten is right here on the 101. The very important highway in Silicon Valley. They entered also Silicon Valley through acquisition. They bought a company called Ebates And they immediately got not only a revenue model, but a cultural model that helped them imbue a US mentality into their discussion, a Silicon Valley into their discussion. And frankly, they maintain the exercise. Now, Mikitani-san also asked that his team speaks in English. That's a requirement of the company. So there are different things that are pushing the companies to really experiment. And I think that is also, those are examples that have worked.
Totally.
I think more of them are going to come.
I agree. We also have Rakuten as a case in the book, right? We spoke to Saito-san, the head of like well-being, chief well-being officer from Rakuten, and one of their values is speed, speed, speed. So the way that they enter market typically is exactly through acquisitions. They move fast. They did face challenges in the very beginning because they just acquired, but didn't really sort of take note or conscious of the culture of the company that they acquired. So part of what they actually changed was to try to workshop the way through in terms of finding ways where the acquired company tie their values to the Rakuten values and building that office buy-in, right? So that's one of the learnings that they actually got out of that exercise. So and those challenges that they face as they entered into new markets.
Well, I also think there are guides that help the other way. So if you look at like Japan Cloud, which works with a lot of US cloud companies, bringing them into Japan. Fukuda-san is a good example. He spent years at Oracle and Salesforce, and he understands these companies. He launched Marketo in Japan. So on a technology level, they actually help be ambassadors. So, I would also think about how we look for people that have had that experience, because they've gone through the good and the bad. They help. And they're in Tokyo and they're in Silicon Valley now. That's the good news.
I have something to add, which I think is very important for Japanese executives to consider. So when I was relocated to Silicon Valley, I was 45 with my wife and with my 4 children. So when you relocate from one country to the other and you have a family, you as a company have to think not just about the person you're sending, rather about the whole package. Will the spouse, whether it's the man or the woman, will they have things to do here? Will the kids go to good school system? So if you decide to send someone for 1 year, this is not enough. I think that one of the challenges we always were thinking is, what's the optimal minimum time that you send someone from one country to the other until the family is fully integrated, until the person who relocated begins to understand better what's happening and begins to bring really value to the company. So the decision is not just about one person, it's about the whole person's ecosystem, wife, husband, children, which place they stay, schooling system. You need the whole ecosystem to be happy, and then the results will be much better.
Totally. I want to turn to one last question before we take the audience questions, and it's a bit related to the topic right before Gidon's comments. It's more about how to influence the headquarter and get their buy-in in terms of international. And since we have you on the call, Abe, that's a question I really want to pose to you in terms of what are some of the best practices? I know Eric is very international minded, but you've also worked for other organizations where the leader may have not been that way. What are some of the ways where you actually influence them to take actions on the insights that you've gathered in your work, in new and international markets?
Yeah, it's a good question, Klaus. So your definition of entrepreneur is right. First of all, you have to speak the language of Silicon Valley, and you have to speak the language of the countries that you represent. So the ability to interpret and then change your translation accordingly is important. First of all, like the job of somebody like myself is to prioritize on behalf of the company. So you're not going to win every argument or every opportunity even though every one of them could be interesting and great. So it's up to somebody, first of all, to prioritize and filter on behalf of the international markets and say, we are not going to do this, or we are going to do this first or second. And I hear you, but you also have to know when to advocate for the priorities internally. So I just think it's like any other politicking, for lack of a better way. You have to work the decision makers and the owners inside of the company. So that could be the CFO, that could be the CEO, that could be the CRO, that could be the CPO, et cetera, or it could be a variety of other people in between. I think what's important also is to get to the root cause of the problem. So sometimes there are people that can solve things quickly inside the company. It's difficult for somebody outside the US to get to that person, to articulate the problem and to solve it. It's easier for me to be patient, curious, interpret, and then bring it back into the organization and find the person that can solve the problem quickly with me. So I do think there's a lot of prioritizing, there's a bit of politicking, and then there's an interpretation that the individual has to make on behalf of the company, taking stock in what they're hearing from the international markets, but then honestly doing the best to think globally and then frankly pick from 1 to 5 what the most important things are for the business, and then solicit the business accordingly.
That's a really, really good answer. Gideon, do you have any thoughts?
I fully agree. I would say that from my own experience, before I was relocated from Israel to Silicon Valley, my biggest challenges when I was still in my old country, working for a Silicon Valley company, was that the 10 hours difference, and at that time, by the way, there was no Zoom that could help us. So we had to wait until the morning to see if our American colleagues sent us email back. And if I came to the office and I didn't see an email response, 24 hours were gone because of the 10 hours difference. So you've got to be extremely mindful to time differences. And you've got, as I mentioned before, when I showed you the slide, you've got to have a champion at the headquarters that will kind of do the repeating and see that the satellite or the branch office voice is heard at the headquarters. Because if the satellite team doesn't feel that they're listening, someone is listening to them, they will lose their morale very fast. So time difference, lack of champions at the headquarters can really jeopardize the success of the team you're sending here.
One of the things that we've developed for a book, this is a very simple thing, but can actually have a big impact, is what we call an expansion pitch deck for anyone that really sees an opportunity in an international market. And part of that process in building that deck is actually socializing it amongst the team. So you slowly pitch this to multiple people, get their feedback, and then get their mental buy-in in pushing your efforts up to the up in the organization, right? So it's about evangelizing internally as well and build that coalition of buy-in internally within the company. And it's the simple conversations that often have massive impact. I'm sure you can agree on that as well, Abe. It's really building those relationships internally that can help you build sort of a coalition of evangelists that will help you push your agenda forward.
Yeah, you know how to communicate too, because a lot of times, like, the attention span of a Silicon Valley leader is very small. So you got to get to the problem, the root cause, and the solution. That's the language we speak in. And then frankly, you also have to sometimes make parallels. Like, I'll often say, well, it's a lot like the Amazon of Japan, or it's very similar to the da-da-da-da-da. So at least they have a framework if they haven't been there. And then it also quantifies the opportunity size.
Totally, exactly. There's one question for Abe here. It's a bit more product oriented, if you will. Do you see any difference in how Japanese like to use Zoom as compared to Americans? Have you made any changes to the product to accommodate that?
First of all, I think there was a reticence in Japan around using video conferencing in general. And it was slowly becoming much more accepted, though in general, again, many Japanese didn't like the concept of using video on a forefront. What was changing that was when Prime Minister Abe-san was talking about telework days in preparation for the Tokyo Olympics more than a year and a half ago. People knew that the change was happening. So there's a learned fashion to get accepted to it. Obviously, with the pandemic, it forced a lot of people to think about how to try this quickly. So the good news is it did catch on and people became accustomed to it. We've been sensitive to try to create features that I think make it easier. For example, we're all experiencing the translation feature today. That's perfectly suited for global audiences, and in Japan, I think it's extremely powerful. We've used it a lot and it's been amazing. I do think the flexibility of the boxes helps. So in Japan, like where you sit is important. So, we allow the boxes to move very quickly and fluidly, which means your seating chart can be arranged by your team, much like you would in a meeting in Japan. There's other little things like through integrations, you can virtually pass the meishi. So the business card can be passed using an integration tool with some of our third-party partners. And that's great because it becomes more similar, I guess you could say, to how people are accustomed to meeting in Japan. So little things like that help. And of course, the product is fully localized in Japanese. So we think that that's helped people get accustomed, and those subtle changes are useful. Our partner is also helping educate the market with us. We spent a fair amount of time educating and marketing so that people are aware on how to use these tools. That's also helped as well, Klaus.
Awesome, cool. We have another question here. I've been quite inspired by the Silicon Valley mindset, but I believe the Silicon Valley mindset is not almighty, as everything has pros and cons. What are some of the cons of the Silicon Valley mindset?
Maybe I'll start with this. The person who asked this question got it right to the point. Yeah. The fact that we're so tech savvy here makes it a little bit challenging, I would say. I would love to see also non-tech things happen here, which would be extremely helpful. I think that to some extent, we've developed here a bunch of young people, usually millennials, who are obsessed with entitlement of services that they may get from all kinds of new technologies and new type of services. I think that prices here are extremely expensive. However, having said that, still, if you look at the pluses versus the minuses, it's the biggest concentration of so much talent from so many places that offsets, in my humble opinion, most of the cons that we don't see, that we may get exposed here. There's no other place that I will have a chance to meet on a given day people from 60 countries that can work in my company. And this dialogue that we develop, the culture we are getting exposed, will help us also develop better services, better products. This is something that I think, if we don't become too arrogant in Silicon Valley, this can still push and keeps us at Silicon Valley at the edge of innovation in the future. We still have to be cautious about the future.
Any thoughts on that, Abe?
I think Silicon Valley is in a wonderful place. The weather's great, and the people are friendly, and it's a lovely part of the country. I am also inspired by the fact that people have very much audacious goals. Mm-hmm. Pretty much everybody who moves here thinks they can change the world, and that's a good place to start. Sometimes it's very humbling. I'd say, the downside is we talk a lot about the successes in technology that come out of Silicon Valley. The probability of success is still very low. Most companies don't make it. That's part of the process here. And that's just the truth. I do think Gideon's right. Like, we all believe that everybody drives Teslas and that they're using wireless technology, and that, you should press a button and everything works automatically for you and it's all voice activated and so forth. That's not how everywhere in the world works, nor is everywhere in the world has full access or the privileges that we have in Silicon Valley. So sometimes getting people to think outside the bubble is important too. They don't necessarily have the full view of the world all the time, like anywhere else. So
Totally.
I can add something about Google for startups, for instance. Google for startups is actually helping Google get introduced to fintech technologies, which are in many cases more developed in other countries. If you look at Africa, if you look at Brazil, if you look at the Philippines and some other countries in that region, they are not using cash. So for instance, this has pushed these countries to come with wonderful innovation there that actually Google can implement later here in Silicon Valley. So innovation exists all over the world. Just let us all remember this.
I guess one of the things I would say in terms of maybe it's more like a behavioral thing, is more the sales culture in Silicon Valley is very like high tone, very strong, if you will. And part of it is, at least American people are taught to be in front of people from their 3 years old. That's why Aaron, my co-founder, he's very good at speaking to people because he's, just ingrained in him, right? And so when you then go to a country like Japan, that can be very challenging. You need to kind of lower your tone of voice, be a bit more humble in your approach, and find the different ways to sort of navigate a conversation, if you will. And it's not everyone that has that, that muscle like Abe has, having worked with many, many regions and many, many countries, right? And so being able to navigate different cultures is not everyone can do that, quite frankly. And it also goes a bit back to the change the world comment that Abe said. Believe we can change the world here, but going into Japan, just say we can change the world there, that's very, very difficult, right? So it's just a very different culture. And we can't just go in and disrupt things in terms of business practices, for example. So we have to really understand how can we take this product and take this business and the way that it operates and find a way to tailor it and to that market, right? And so that's really, really, really difficult, right? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for companies here when they go to unique markets like Japan or Korea and others. Let's see here. There's one question here, and it's related to more the office here, and I think this is going to be the last one. When explaining a local office with 10 staff members in Silicon Valley, how many of them should be non-Japanese? I know it's a very specific question, but
I would say that it's not how many non-Japanese. I think that Klaus, you probably remember when we were in Japan and I looked at the startups that we were kind of trying to mentor. I used to challenge them on a few more issues. I want to see a balance of men and women. Let's remember 50+% of the world are women. And so when you ask me about 10 people office in Silicon Valley, how many women, how many men, how many Japanese, and how many Silicon Valley people? I would say that I would love to see at least 50% of an office here in the Valley with non-traditional Japanese. Out of the 5 that are Japanese, I would like to see at least 2 or 3 women too. And I'm specific about this topic because I think that when we talk about diversity, it's also the gender. And this really bothered me when I was in Japan, that I didn't see enough what we call here in Silicon Valley female founders, female executives, because female founders and female executives can actually change the way a company thinks and be more sensible, sensitive, things that are needed. So I gave a longer answer to a very short question.
As always.
My honor.
I kind of like to end the calls with, maybe a unique story or something like that. What is sort of your biggest international failure or situation where you felt embarrassed? Any thoughts there?
Probably the list is long and distinguished, given the places that I've been. Sometimes when I haven't been prepared and really my mind is closed, I'm busy. I'm in a country for a day. And I'm too caught up. This is general. I'm not going to give a specific example, but in general, when I'm not listening and I'm not taking stock in the fact that I am somewhere else very different.
Yeah.
Half the experience of international business is being present and participating and wanting to.
Yeah.
Really wanting to, enjoying it as much as you're developing it.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a clinical element where, we go in with a precise mission, you've got a very specific function to do for a job. And honestly, you miss the gift. And the gift is the ability to actually be a part and participate as you develop. So that's been a mistake I've made. Sometimes I've been too short.
Yeah, good point. Good one.
I think
short answer.
I think that setting your expectation right when you travel abroad is a key factor. I remember I flew to Brazil years ago on behalf of my previous company, and I fell into this cultural trap wherein we presented our solution, and the head of IT at this company said to me, well, we'll give you our decision mañana. And mañana to us is tomorrow. But in Brazil, mañana is undefined time in the future. I came back to my office here in Silicon Valley, and I said to my CEO, well, I was very successful. We'll get our answer very soon. It took them 6 months to come with an answer. And this is such a good example of setting your expectations right, understanding culture, language differences, etc.
I'll tell the short story. I was traveling to Latin America, and as you know, when you greet each other, you kiss on both cheeks. And I was meeting with this business partner, and I have kind of forgotten how it worked, and I accidentally half kissed his wife. so that was a bit embarrassing. He was fine. He understand that, but that happened, right? So
America understands it.
So that was a bit embarrassing, but he forgave me and everything, and we laughed about it over drinks and everything. So on that note about kissing other business partners' wives, I just want to thank Abe and Gideon for being on today's call. Really appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. And so if anybody want to reach out to us, by all means, do so. I want to punt it off over to Yamashita-san to conclude the call of today. And so again, Yamashita-san, thanks for inviting us to this webinar. Really appreciate all the hard work from your team. And we've seen we had like 300 people on today's call. So really, really appreciate the invitation and having us to lead this conversation.
Thank you very much, Klaus, Abe, and Gideon, for your great presentation, your thoughtful and warm advice on Japanese audience. It's been a great pleasure to have you with us today. 皆様、今日で4回にわたるウェビナーをすべて終了しました。いかがでしたか？ジェトロは今後も皆様に少しでもお役に立つような企画をしてまいります。アンケートはその検討にとても役立つものでございますので、ぜひご協力ください。それではまた皆様にお会いできることを楽しみにしております。本日はどうもありがとうございました。